So today we're talking about being feminine in tantric intimacy and tantric sex. And this is really an interesting thing. And the first thing I want to talk about is, what do I mean by tantric intimacy or tantric sex? Most of the time, in most societies, we aren't taught anything about sex. And so we default to a procreative model that our bodies desire. We desire to be close, we desire to rub together, and then we desire some kind of orgasm. And this tends to be how we model our sex life, because we just aren't taught anything. Tantric sex says, or Tantra says, we're more than just our physical bodies. Tantra really isn't about sex, it's about life, but it includes relationships and intimacy and running and golf and everything. So Tantra isn't about sex as much in the West might believe. But when we bring the principles of Tantra into our intimacy expands like our life expands when we study Tantra, right? The study of Tantra says we are divine beings living through this wonderful physical being. Well, how does that change our relationships? How does that change our sexual intimacy? And it changes it a lot, because in the same way that if we sort of live, let's say, a regular physical life devoid of the divine, what do we focus on? We focus on our physicality. We focus on financial success. We focus on things that we can count, touch, name, because those are the only things that in the physical world matter. As soon as we study Tantra in life, suddenly there's entire other dimensions that open up to us. And suddenly even a business venture or a conversation with a child or a friend suddenly takes on all kinds of other nuances. It takes on all kinds of other dimensions that we start to observe things. And well, isn't that interesting? And as much as I can see that this is happening physically, there's so much more here, which also means there's so much more possible. So then instead of saying, in life we often get caught between, do I do this or do I do that? All of a sudden in Tantra, we open everything up and suddenly there's 100 possibilities. So now we imagine taking this into intimacy. Living kind of in the physical world, it's about the bodies. It's about the orgasm. It's about, what does my body look like? It's about what does the vajra, the penis look like? What do the boobs look like? What does this look like? How do you like pleasure? How do I make sure you're pleasured? How do I make sure I'm pleasured? It's just very, very physical, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Every so often, some rock'em sock'em physical regular sex is super fun. But Tantra says there's more to life. And when we bring that into intimacy, suddenly the bodies become the vehicles to experience something bigger. And that changes everything. And it has nothing to do with tricks. It has nothing to do with skills or being a great lover. It has nothing to do with bringing the other person to orgasm or you having an orgasm or anything like that. Because now even that little orgasm in the physical world that is normally meant for procreation or something like that, that orgasm shifts into a different dimension almost, and you experience a state of orgasm. It's kind of the difference between having a moment of happiness that is fleeting and having a realization deep in your heart that shifts your state of happiness for maybe a whole day or a year. That's the difference, say, between trying to get this momentary orgasm and shifting it into our nervous system and feeling it flow through our whole body. So this is really significant for what we're talking about today, because we're talking about how to be feminine, how to be the feminine polarity. And this is based in my latest book that came out in August of 2023, The Divine Union of the Masculine and Feminine. And in this, what we talk about is the thrill of fully polarizing in our case today, in intimacy. Because oftentimes in regular sex, it's more like two masculine energies going at it. It's like a tennis match. I do this, and then you do this, and then I do this, and you do this. And the energy stays quite neutral, actually. Even if it's really exciting, it's all sort of staying in the middle. Tantric intimacy says, no, we are energy channels. The energy can flow from one person into the other. And so a beautiful artist named Gina Murray painted the cover of this book. And I asked her if she could possibly create a yin-yang symbol that flowed into itself, that the masculine, the white side here, flowed into the feminine while the feminine was flowing into the masculine. How could we create the feeling of the energies always flowing in and out of each other until they flowed so much they actually created a whole? And this is very different than the tennis match kind of sex. This is where when I can fully polarize into the feminine, and I can say in the dynamic of giving and receiving, when I fully polarize into the feminine receiving, I am like Mother Earth opening to the rain. The rain then pours into Mother Earth, nourishing her, feeding the rivers, feeding everything. At no time does Mother Earth turn around and then feed the rain. The bliss and the joy is in this energy flowing into Mother Earth, right? Of course, if you really look at how that works, then the rain eventually evaporates up into the sky and turns into rain. So it does actually cycle. But in the moment of the rainstorm, it is a full polarization of the masculine giving and the feminine receiving. And that's what creates a flow that's actually hard to fathom, because we've lived in a world of separation and domination for literally millennia. And so what that means is, even if someone gives something to us, and it could be anything, it could be a gift, it could be help, it could be advice, it could be a chocolate cake, it could be anything. But when someone gives something to us, we hold back just a little. We don't receive it completely with our whole heart, because of this domination paradigm we've lived in. They are likely giving it to us with strings attached. They're likely giving it to us because they want something else. They might be giving it to us because they feel obligated. They might be giving it to us because they feel it makes them look good, like someone giving to a homeless person and then taking a picture of themselves giving to the homeless person. Are they really, is that person sitting on the street able to wholly open and be appreciative? No, because the person giving it to them was actually giving to themselves. It had nothing to do with that person, right? So there's often a lot of challenge, especially being in the feminine. The masculine has their own issues, but the feminine's very difficult because of this domination paradigm. In that paradigm, all masculine energy oppresses all feminine energy. So for example, today, we're going to talk about 4 main aspects of being feminine in sexual intimacy, in relationships too, but we're definitely just going to talk about the sexual part. One is the receiving to the masculine giving. One is the chaos, mystery, wildness of the feminine to the masculine structure and order. Following to the masculine leading. And the other one is truth, reality, manifest truth. And that's going to be the last one we talk about. In this domination paradigm, the masculine energy oppresses all of these things. This is what our experience has been, our ancestral trauma has been. Because the receiving, well, I don't want to receive because I probably am not going to like what I'm getting given. A lot of women, especially I work with, say, well, I really struggle to receive. It's like, do you struggle to receive? Do you struggle to receive things that you desire? Or have historically you always had to receive things you didn't want, right? because that is the domination paradigm. Children are forced to learn certain things. Employees are forced to do things. Wives are forced to have sex with their husband because they have no right, or they're chattel, or they're owned, or they're, they just are lesser beings. This is how it's been for a long time, up until the current century. It's a huge deal. And that's a lot of ancestral memory inside of us that make even us afraid of being in the full feminine. Right? So that's a huge part of this journey, is to give ourselves grace, to give ourselves space, to slowly learn how to receive, to slowly learn how to trust our own feminine strength. And really, and again, whoever your partner is, they too are going to have a journey into the healthy masculine, because they've, of course, been hit with the club of that dominating masculine. They've had it done to them. They've maybe had to mimic it in life, in business, in, being the strong one and all that kind of thing, right? So they too have a journey to take to actually be a healthy masculine. Well, you cannot receive from an unhealthy masculine. And this is really, really important, because let's say you're in a relationship right now where this isn't reality. Like, for example, so this is my book, Tantric Intimacy, and this came out a few years ago. The first entire section of this is based in redefining love. Because without love, without genuine love, we talk about agape, philia, eros, that kind of thing. Without a genuine, open, flowing, loving connection, none of these dynamics work. I can't openly receive if I can't trust the person I'm with. And I don't mean that they're bad people. I just mean that the nature of our relationship doesn't allow me to let my guards down. And it could be history. It could be years of acting a certain way together. So that's one of the interesting things. And that's why the truth piece, the fourth one I mentioned, honoring our truth. And this goes for all people. It's in all people's feminine. But today we're just talking about, if you prefer to be in the feminine polarity, you have to be in touch with your truth. You have to be of sober mind within the relationship. And by sober, I'm not talking about drugs and alcohol kind of given. I mean sober of emotional mind, because very often we will become very attached emotionally to, I want this to work. I want this relationship to work. I want to be in love. I want to be loved. I want to be this. And those emotions make us a little drunk, and we're not able to actually be clear in our own mind. This is so important, to be clear in our own mind, to be connected with our deep truth. Because in the masculine feminine dynamic, the masculine must read the feminine. That's how the masculine decides what they're going to do. I remember one time I had this wonderful partner, and he was very quiet. He really actually wasn't into sex. It wasn't actually a big thing for him. But then of course he's dating me, and I'm like, this is a real big part of the relationship for me. And so he was like, okay, cool. And he'd never heard of the masculine feminine or anything like that, like not in this context. So I explained to him that, it's simple. It's giving, it's initiating in intimacy. It's planning date nights. It's sort of sweeping me off my feet and allowing me to blissfully follow. There's a real thrill in that. Again, we have some issues with it, with the domination paradigm history. But when you can trust the other person and they really have you in their heart, what a thrill to be swept off your feet and just allow yourself to feel like a queen, to feel like that loved person, right? And so he actually ended up being an incredible lover. Like, our lovemaking was so potent and incredible. It was just amazing. And sex really wasn't a big part of his life. And I asked him one day, I said, so if I was to create a course to teach men how to be a great lover like you are, which made him very embarrassed because he was very shy, I said, what advice would you give them? And he's just looked at me and he kind of shrugged his shoulders and he said, I don't know. I just follow you. This is why we have to be clear. In a minute, we're going to talk about chaos and wild mystery and all that kind of thing. But we have to have that deep truth. We can't be like, it's almost like imagining that, what if I have the idea that I always have to be the sexy porn star? And I always have to be wild, and I always have to be crazy, and I always have to be the sex kitten, and I always have to be that. That's not my truth, right? That may not be my truth in this moment. Maybe sometimes it's my truth, but it's not my truth today. Well, if it isn't actually grounded in reality, it's not going to work. You might have crazy porn sex, which, whatever, that's fun. But you're not going to have tantric intimacy. You're not going to have the kind of intimacy that allows you to expand into that universal energy, which deep in our hearts, if you're anything like me, you've always known was possible. I remember I didn't have sex until I was 20. I was all going to save myself for marriage and stuff. The irony. It's hilarious. And then when I finally did have sex, it was so awful. Like, it lasted all of 5 minutes. And then the worst part of it is he turned over and he said to me, I don't want to see you anymore. After waiting all this time. And I was actually very devastated. It isn't till decades later that I realized that perhaps he was actually embarrassed that he had ejaculated so soon. I didn't know enough about sex to know that that was a thing or it even mattered. But I was really devastated by that. But I was almost devastated at an existential level. Like, there's no way this is what sex is. There's no way. Not just because I built it up in my head from Hollywood, but because something deep in my heart knew that there was a much bigger experience. This was supposed to be cosmic. There was something significant about virginity and all this, and that intimacy was actually powerful. And I was devastated by this, going, like, it was almost like some fabric of reality just split in my head that, are you kidding? This can't be right. And so because the feminine has had this massive oppression for so long, our truth has been oppressed. Our truth has never mattered. All you have to do, you bend to whatever authority, you bend to whatever is in the masculine authoritative place, and you make them happy so that you're not put out on a street, beaten, let go, thrown out of the herd, whatever, and you just bend yourself. So this idea of diving deep into our truth and actually honoring self is the foundation of all of being feminine in intimacy. All of it. We have to be that deep, wise woman. We have to connect. And it doesn't matter where you are in life. Maybe you're young, maybe you're old. It doesn't matter. Maybe you've had a million sexual experiences, or maybe you've never had any. It doesn't matter. All you have to know is that at every step in intimacy and the relationship, obviously, you're just honest. You're true to self. And obviously, honesty doesn't mean being mean to someone or here's what I think of you. Not that. Honest, honoring satya, truth, right? So the first dynamic, receiving what is given. So as I said before, receiving is like Mother Earth opening to the rain or opening to thunder and lightning, right? Or opening to lightning and feeling the surge of energy flowing through you. And this is what's really interesting, is that we often talk about women being multi-orgasmic and men being singularly orgasmic. And the point is that in tantric intimacy, as you play in this masculine feminine dance and the magnetism builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, there's a point where all of a sudden you're one. And in that state, you join in an orgasmic state. It isn't about one person being multi-orgasmic and the other only being able to ejaculate once before recovering, right? It's about joining together in this energy, like that lightning entering Mother Earth, creating a magnetic charge around, and it creates this incredible storm, the power of the storm. You know, if you like storms, I love electrical storms. To feel the power, and it's almost like the dance between the heaven and the earth, right? Imagine that in intimacy. Imagine feeling that arcing of energy from the masculine to the feminine. You require polarity. You require, in our case, figuring out how to receive. Another great example is imagining a raging river. Imagine yourself being the banks of a river and the water is flowing through you. Well, part of our issues in life, and it's not a maladaptation, is that we have been hurt by things being given to us that we didn't like, right? Rough handling, mental, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, things like that. So the bottom line is we have dams across that riverbed. You know, we're slowing that river down. We're not letting everything in because we need to kind of vet it. We need to make sure it's okay. And that's why the foundation, of course, is this love, right? It's this foundational love of agape and philia that's so important so that we can release the dams and feel this energy flowing through us. So this sobriety in receiving, we have to be honest if what we're receiving is what we want, right? And that means genuine feedback. And it doesn't have to be like, don't do that. Everything is in kindness. Again, that's the foundation of the love connection of agape, that everything is in kindness and respect, or else we destroy everything, right? But again, we have so much history of it being important that the man is satisfied. And I'm only talking in a heterosexual model here, just because that's the history that we have. But all of these dynamics apply to all orientations. But for example, there was someone found this page out of like a 1960s home economics book. And of course, it was for women to learn how to be a good wife. And one of them was actually about sex. And it was all about how, now, when you have relations with your husband, or however they said it, your pleasure is not important. In fact, it's best to give a few moans here and there so that he feels good about what he's doing. This is a teaching. We were taught to not give proper feedback. That's a huge deal. That's a huge thing that lives inside of us even today. You know, and we think, oh no, that's just back in the 40s or something. It's not. I talked to teenagers today. I remember talking to this one teenager and we were talking about sex, and she said, well, yeah, I mean, obviously sex hurts because that's normal. Sex always hurts, at least in the beginning. And I'm like, and I actually made a video that's on YouTube here that says it's all about that sex should never hurt, right? That you actually should be properly aroused so that the body is craving entry. And if it's hurting, these women are not giving proper feedback. They're not ready, right? In nature, we would push them away. No, I'm not in heat, or I'm not ready, or I'm not interested, or I'm whatever. We would push them away. But we've been trained to no, just bone at the proper time. So this is a huge part of receiving, to actually give proper feedback. And there are times when it's really nice to say, actually, would you mind doing this? That's wonderful. That informs the masculine partner that this is something that will increase the magnetism between you. It will increase the pleasure energy between you. You're not telling them what to do. You're helping. You're sharing, right? This is really important. It's really important that you're honest about whether you're even in the mood. Maybe you're not in the mood at all. But again, oh, they're going to be grumpy and I don't know. And what are they going to think? And I want them to think I'm a sexual person and all this kind of thing. We have to be honest. The feminine is the foundation. This is the container for the intimacy. The masculine is the energy. If the container doesn't actually even want to be there, it's actually shut and nothing works properly. Energy doesn't lie. Our mouths can lie, we can lie, but our bodies don't. Our bodies will not respond. So this level of personal honesty is foundational for being in the feminine. Sometimes it's hard to receive because of fears from the past, relationships in the past, things like that. That's real. And in which case, we just have to communicate. Everybody at this time is learning how to actually connect with each other in genuine ways. Everyone is. As the domination paradigm, as the separation paradigm falls, and we start to realize that, okay, we need to learn how to actually interact with each other, or else we're all just going to become islands. And that's not what we're made for. We're all seeking this. So if you're being intimate with someone and they're doing something and it's not feeling right, to find the kind way to communicate and say, I don't know why, but this doesn't feel right now. And again, if there's love and trust between you, the other person might say, oh, is it always? Or is it just this? Is it just today? And you might say, normally this works, but today it's not. Or maybe it's like, actually, I haven't been able to be touched like that since my last partner, whatever. And then now you have an openness. You have something that you can now discuss. And you've been vulnerable with each other. So now it's sort of like everything's on the table and now healing's possible. Right? Tantric intimacy doesn't have to be all about sex. It's about like your underbelly actually being in a safe place to heal. It's a huge deal. Another thing that's really important when considering how to receive is your partner fully present? Are they actually reading you? Are they reading the situation? How much of themselves are they giving to you? Because being in the feminine is not isolated. It is dependent. You are connected to the one you're with. In regular sex, you can kind of be separate. You could be drunk, you could be high, you could be anything. And you could just, because you're kind of just co-masturbating, right? You're both just kind of rubbing up against each other, making sure everybody's happy. So for all intents and purposes, you're kind of in your own world. You're paying attention to the other person. But how present each person is doesn't really matter because you're just really getting off. So whether you do that by yourself or you do it with another person using their body or their hands, it doesn't really matter. But when we want this kind of merging, this kind of dynamic connection, we actually have to be all in, right? So imagine, let's say you're there, but you're actually thinking about something else. Maybe something happened at work, or maybe someone called and they said something and you're still actually thinking about that. How does that work, right? Maybe this whole yin-yang symbol becomes smaller. Or maybe part of you over here is connecting, but over here you're actually thinking about something else. Energy can't flow then, right? It's just not possible. So this is where, again, Tantra is much more than, obviously, than sex. It's about having a clear mind, learning to be present. This is everything we learn in yoga and meditation, how to actually allow thoughts to flow through our mind and leave our mind so that we can actually focus on whatever we're doing, whether it's having sex, making love, driving, cooking, whatever. Focus is really, really important. It's one of the 8 limbs of yoga. Dharana, single-pointed focus, single-pointed concentration. So this is really important. If your partner is not actually concentrating on you, you'll know it. And parts of you kind of, I picture like Mother Earth and all the flowers are kind of just closing up. The soil's kind of becoming contracted because they're not there. And so this is a huge thing to kind of be aware. Or maybe you're not there. Maybe you don't really want to be there. Maybe you're thinking about something else and you're not able to open because you don't even have enough concentration to even notice whether they're there, right? It's really interesting. So now I want to talk about chaos. And again, we can talk about this. We could talk just about giving and receiving and intimacy for a whole hour, but today we're just going to talk about the feminine. Chaos, wildness, mystery. This is the feminine. The masculine is structure and order. This is that space where, as a woman, or as a man, if you prefer the feminine polarity, there is a desire for people who prefer the feminine polarity to expand to the edges of the world, to experience all that is. Because wildness isn't crazy. It's not mayhem. It's not like, you might go to a workshop where they're exploring your wildness. And so they get you to scream and yell and stick your tongue out and do all this cool stuff. This is just medicine, right? This is just something that helps us expand from our contracted state, right? So it's sort of like, if I'm super contracted, I'm going to go all the way to the other edge of what's possible so that I'm able to have this whole breadth of experience. Maybe wildness is crazy and screaming and head turning and eyes rolling back, maybe, but it's actually everything in between. It's allowing yourself, again, to be 100% present with what is. And if you are in the midst of sexual intimacy with someone and you are in the feminine, so you are receiving whatever they're doing, you are allowing those sensations to flow through you without stop. You are not slowing them down. You're not judging them. Whatever you're feeling, you're allowing your body to flow. You're allowing your sound to come out of your mouth. You're allowing anything to happen because you trust nature. You trust your wildness. You trust your chaos. You're not afraid of it. You're not afraid that you're going to make funny sounds. Or you're going to look weird, or what you're doing is just too strange for the other person. If it's too strange for them, they are not able, they won't be able to actually polarize. Someone who loves being in the masculine, they love being in the masculine because they love to experience feminine energy, right? Feminine energy is wild. It's chaotic. It's unexpected. It's unpredictable. There's a thrill in that. So as we become wilder, and again, I don't mean mayhem. I just mean as we become more untethered, unrestrained, they see that and they become stronger. They create more stillness. If this is a situation, if this is heterosexual and there is a vajra or a penis inside, right? They must master their own ejaculation. They must be able to actually be in control of that because they often talk about that, right? In Tantra, that it's like, oh, I'm not allowed to come. It's like, no, that's not it. You're going to develop mastery between yourself and your vajra, yourself and your penis, that it's a part of you. You can direct it the same way that you can direct your finger, that your finger's not completely out of control and doing stuff you can't, control. You choose. Am I solid and still and allowing my partner to fly into wild, places beyond the unknown? Or am I a victim to this chaos? And as soon as I feel that orgasmic state in her or him, I'm going to blow and the whole thing's going to be over for me in that way anyway, right? So imagine that, again, in a heterosexual model, and the vajra is inside, and the feminine is starting to go into these wild states of orgasm. The stiller they are, the wilder she can become. And the wilder she becomes, the stiller he becomes. And this becomes the polarity, because he's got to keep that. And then there's something magical that happens inside of him where he's like, I've got this. I've got it. And they look at you and they say, I've got you. Go as far as you want. And this is a real thing to hear from someone, because that's when we get to explore. That's when we get to actually drop all the guards, and we're not intentionally doing anything. The energy is coming from them because this is a circuit, right? The power is coming. The universal masculine power is coming through them into us, lighting us up, and we are allowing that energy, that water, to flow down every tributary of our bodies, right? That, and then we are on that ride. It is so thrilling. It is just beyond thrilling. So, of course, the question for us becomes, how comfortable are we with our own wildness? How comfortable are we with our own chaos in our day-to-day life? Do we trust the unknown within us? Do we trust our intuition? Do we trust the steps that we may take? Because if we don't trust it within us in our day-to-day life, there's no way we're going to be able to go there in intimacy. We are going to stay within the same box that we live all day long. So the beautiful thing is, we just have to play with it in life. It's kind of like, imagine going to a dance and no one's on the dance floor, but a song comes on that you love, that this song animates your body. You're not even dancing to the song is dancing you. And if the dance floor was full of people, you'd be more than happy to go out and just bust a move and just dance like crazy. But could you go out and just dance, no matter who's watching? That's like being wild in intimacy. There's a vulnerability. You're the only game in town. You're the only one being wild here. The masculine is holding strong. Are you okay with that kind of attention? It's a big deal. And you don't have to go from 0 to 100, right? Everything is incremental, right? Maybe you add 1%, 5%, maybe you have an aha moment and you pop to 20%, whatever, right? It's a very gentle process. And you'll take it with your partner, right? Because they also, if you suddenly jump to 50, they may not be able to catch up. They may not be able to gather that kind of strength within them. Because for the masculine partner, so the next thing we're going to talk about is following and leading. Well, the crazy thing is, when you're with someone who that their masculine energy is attractive to you, there is something inside of you that desires surrender to it. And in no way is this a weakness. This isn't like surrendering in war or something. This is you going, ooh, like this is knowing someone is a great dancer and you would love to follow, you would love to dance with this person. And you just watch them leading other people and you're like, wow, I would love to experience that. I want to be able to relax into that rhythm. This is really exciting, right? This accesses something inside of us that in the domination paradigm that we've lived within, we don't get to experience. On occasion, we might experience something like, let's say we go to a concert and the band is playing a song that you love. The whole place knows the song. Everyone's singing along. And some part of you drops your guard and allows you to just flow with it. And your whole body is vibrating. And you are not in control. You are flowing with the energy of what's happening. And it's all being led from the stage. And everyone's in this beautiful thing. That is the universal feminine. It is so juicy and fantastic and wonderful, right? So in the lead and follow, in intimacy, this is where you meet someone and you go, wow. And your whole body really honestly just becomes mush because your body intuitively wants to surrender and go on this ride. For the masculine partner, this is a huge deal. I remember one partner, we were playing in this because he had that energy. And as soon as he was there. As soon as we would be on the bed and he'd kind of put his arm over me and kind of look at me, my whole body would just become mush. And later we talked about it and he said, it's wild because he'd never really played in this masculine feminine dynamic like that before. He said, this is a level of responsibility I'm not used to, right? Wow, I really have to get my ducks in order because you're really trusting me. Like you are completely open to me. Wow, I really have to up my game. So this is why this whole journey is incremental for everybody. And this is why joyful communication is so wonderful, to be able to say, I want to completely let go. And the other person says, I've got you. Or you say, oh my God, and they're like, I don't have you. I'm not, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. Right. And you slow down. And because you love each other, you're kind to each other, you respect each other. So you want everyone to have a great experience. And there's always tomorrow, or there's always the next time. We can be very light about this journey in the masculine feminine. And it's interesting too, this complete releasing. I tell a story in the Divine Union book about one time we were making love and he was fully in the lead, right? And I was fully trusting, like everything was right. And this is really important, right? This is the correct feedback, that everything has to be right. No one's being forced into anything, right? Everything was right. And I could feel his power just flowing into me. And the voice inside my head was, relax, relax more, relax more. And I just kept relaxing my body and I kept thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be like a rag doll in a minute. But with every relaxed muscle in my body, it was like more energy flowed through the muscle, that I would relax a little bit more and more energy would flow through. It was almost like I was like this and no energy can get through the fist. And then I release a little and blood starts to flow. And I release a bit more and blood starts to flow and I release. And by the time I'm completely open and resting, the energy is flowing freely. And that's what it was like. That's what surrender feels like. And then when they feel that surrender, like imagine, okay, so like let's say the blood flow is down here, and this is the masculine trying to get through. As you release, this becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and now the energy is flowing through the masculine even more, and then it flows through the feminine even more, and amazing things happen. It's kind of like that leader and follower dancing. As the leader leads the follower, and the follower realizes, wow, they're really paying attention to me. They're really a great leader. Then you relax a little. And then the leader goes, whoa, they're really relaxing. They trust me. Okay, I'm going to do something that they're really going to like. And then the person smiles and like, oh my, I loved that. Okay, I'm going to relax even more. And the leader goes, wow, they liked that. I'm going to do even more. And as a polarity, they keep getting wider and wider, right? I'm going to keep saying he and she, but the leader gets bigger and bigger and the follower gets more relaxed and more relaxed, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden it's like, whew, they get into that almost a universal spiral. And if you're watching them, it is the most epic thing to watch, that merging into union, right? But of course, the feminine has to be able to follow. And for me, the first time I ever experienced that was years ago. I opened a dance studio and I loved to dance. I loved to couple dance. My husband wasn't that thrilled with it. And so when we would dance at weddings and stuff, I would kind of backlead him. I would sort of pull us around the dance floor. It would still look like he was leading, but I was actually leading. Well, I went into business with this guy who was a great dancer. He'd been teaching dance for 30 years. And I would every so often try to backlead him. And he'd look at me, he'd say, Katrina, relax. I'm leading. Just follow. But I had so many issues with that in life, right? Because I didn't trust people or whatever, for good reason. And I couldn't. But then all of a sudden something happened. We were doing the bolero. I'll never forget it. And my head was sort of, resting back here. And he's leading me around like this, because the feminine is generally going backwards. And all of a sudden I completely relaxed into the lead. And I literally, it's like my body disappeared and I was floating. I remember one time we were performing at a dance, and friends of mine were there from university. And they said, I've never seen you. You were like a flower. Like, it's like you were actually floating on the dance floor. And because normally in life, I'm a bit more of a bull in a china shop. So it was a really beautiful thing. And that's when I realized the power and the joy of the feminine. And that's really what's possible in lovemaking too. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but they've started chainsaws outside. So I'm going to surrender to the chainsaws outside. I'm going to take it as a sign. But I'm going to put my glasses on. And if you have any questions or thoughts, I'd love if you could put them in the chat so that we can go deeper or talk more about it. Hey, Grace. Think of how many people have had the first sexual experience that you did, that you described, and then think, is this it? Totally. I think it happens a lot. I think that becomes the bar for a lot of our experiences. I remember a friend of mine, when my kids were teenagers, my son wanted to have a girl over overnight. And I was still really of the old mindset that, well, you're going to sleep in separate rooms and, on different floors and all this. And I had this friend visiting from California who's a very interesting yogi. And she said, well, why don't you just give them your bedroom? And I was like, what? And she said, Katrina, they're going to have sex in the back of a car somewhere or hiding. And that girl is going to have a very poor experience. The way procreative sex works is the male, it goes until he ejaculates. So he's going to have that much pleasure. But the girl will likely not. And she said, if you force them into the backseat of a car somewhere, that might be all the experience she has. Is that really what you want for her? And that really blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's a great point. Do you think that the sexual experience between two women has that very open response to ecstasy and abandonment? Totally. I think the thing is, it's just energy. When people, it's funny, I mean, I'm definitely predominantly heterosexual. But remember, I was at an event. It was actually a drag bingo event last year. And there was this woman, and she was definitely of the masculine polarity, like through and through. And she was gorgeous. And we were standing at the bar getting a drink, and she just turned to me and said, there was some reason that she had said something to me. And I felt that same complete surrender to her energy. I literally was like, wow, right? Energy's energy. Regardless of what the sexual parts are, when that energy flows, she could spin my top, I'm pretty sure. I appreciate so much what you said about how if we were animals in nature, not human animals, we would just kick out the male if we don't feel like it. Totally. In regard to my previous comment, I tend to question myself and think there's something wrong with me. Not a good feeling. Totally. And it's interesting. It's one of the things that for the masculine partners, and this is men and women who tend to be in the masculine polarity, it's really powerful for them to know that just because I say no now, it doesn't mean I'm saying to no to you as a person. I'm not saying no to you for tomorrow. I'm not saying no to you in an hour, just in this moment. And it's interesting, like in the book, I talk about an example. When I was traveling, I was in Portugal for a weekend for a women's dance retreat. And we were studying African dances and like kizomba and things. So there were these women up from Angola helping us with these beautiful dances. And kizomba is a couple's dance, and it can be sort of danced out here or it can be danced really close. And one night they were having a discussion about, just challenges in the dance floor kind of idea. And they were talking about how when the men would come up from Angola and dance in the clubs in Europe, they would often get into a lot of trouble with the European women. Because in their culture, the women were, in the Angolan culture, the women were taught to be very strong, just like in nature, like not right now. And that's it. But that didn't stop the men. That didn't stop them from pursuing. It just meant that the woman was holding boundaries. So they would start the dance kind of out here, right? Kind of with this much space. But the women would always determine how close they got. And so if the men were always in pursuit. And so they were sort of always pulling her in. And she would be like, nope, just there. And the men would be like, cool, awesome, let's dance. They didn't take it personally because they were so in the masculine polarity. The woman was so in the feminine polarity. She's just being honest that in this moment, that's just the way it is. And especially in a heterosexual situation or in a same-sex couple where it's women, if you're cycling, if you're a woman, you are chemically different every single day of the month. And anyone tuned in with that from the masculine side knows it. They know that you're not the same all the time, right? We're always different. And so what was interesting is, so the women in Angola, they would be every so often, if it was feeling good, okay, you can come closer now. Okay, now we can like grind it out. It'll be awesome. But the problem is the European women, in general, were taught to coddle the male ego, to not be honest, right? Because the men, of course, were taught that if they're rejected, there's something wrong with them. Or, I mean, maybe this is just Hollywood or whatever it is, but they were taught, they take it really personally. And now I'm rejected and now no one loves me. Or maybe they become abusive even, right? And so the men would come into Europe and they would be dancing. And of course, they were just, as they would always do, naturally kind of pulling the women closer and closer. But the women weren't pushing back. They were just allowing it because they didn't want to seem like they weren't any fun. They didn't want to seem that they were being, I don't know, frigid or something. And by the time the men are just thinking right on, like I'm reading the woman's all in. And next thing you know, they're grinding up against them and the women are pissed off and charging them with sexual assault, right? So there's a huge cultural thing to know that, wow, in my culture, I'm supposed to make the man happy. As we talked about previously, I'm supposed to moan and groan to make them happy, right? As opposed to just being honest and saying, well, this is reality. Awesome. The men had no problem with it. And in fact, it made them stronger because they were like, all right, challenge. Then I may have to dance a little bit differently if I want her to let me in closer, right? It allowed the men to stay on their game. So it's a huge deal. But it's a great point. Thank you for mentioning that. I totally understand and agree that energy is energy. Yes, it is energy that attracts or repels, and that energy can come from anyone. Totally. So how can our cultural training about sexual energy be relearned? You know what's funny? I believe it's just awareness. I really do. I think it is, as soon as we know, it's already corrected. Because then what happens is, let's say you're in a new relationship and they're sort of coming on strong, and in your honest truth, you're just not there in this moment. That's all. You can say to them, I'm actually not feeling it right now, but I really want you to know that it doesn't mean I'm not going to not feel it in an hour. And what's wild about it is, I mean, if they get pissed off and they're like, well, screw this, well, then you've dodged a bullet. They're not even interested in this. They're not interested in the masculine feminine dynamic. They want, because one of the interesting things that's hard about the masculine feminine is historically this dynamic has been flipped. That those in power, theoretically in masculine energy, but not, the ones that they're overpowering who are in the feminine but not receiving, they are actually enslaved to the masculine. This is sort of that king slave dynamic. The king wants something, you must respond, right? And so suddenly, if you don't respond, you are sent to the gallows or something, right? This is a really important dynamic that we have. That's not masculine feminine. That's king slave dynamic, right? And so if someone is all pissed off because you've said no, this is a conversation to have. This is a conversation to have about what is the nature of our relationship here? Do you actually want to ride the feminine or not? But then, of course, it comes back to us. Do we trust that feminine? Do we trust our own chaos? Do we trust that wildness? Because if we're comfortable with it, they will become comfortable with it too. And then it'll become exciting. It will become a challenge to meet, as opposed to kind of that fat cat syndrome of sitting back waiting for you to peel their grapes or something, right? That doesn't empower a man or a masculine partner if it's a woman. It's not empowering to make it easy. It's empowering to honor your truth, not to intentionally make it difficult, but to honor your truth and allow them to rise to that. Allow them to meet it. It's kind of like, why do people want to climb Mount Everest or any other mountain? They want to meet the challenge. It strengthens them. It's not torture. It's not being mean. It's empowering. And when we simply honor our truth, we're not intentionally being crazy to make them have to do something. We're just being honest for the first time in millennia and allowing our masculine partners to rise to that and empowering them. Yeah. Thanks, Carla. So having a more open, relaxed space will bring forth that sexual energy that innately we will know what to do. Totally. It's like hanging out with a friend. If you're hanging out with a friend and there is mutual trust and respect and everything's awesome, it's easy to figure out what to do this afternoon. Do you want to do this? Sure. You want to do this? Not really. Okay. Do you want to do this? Yeah, that'd be fun. That's it. But if you're with someone that's full of judgment or they've got an agenda or something else, suddenly everything's hard and the energy doesn't flow. It's like one time I was being interviewed by a couple on their podcast, and they were swingers, and they were really into, very highly sexualized lifestyles and stuff. And I would tell them how I loved making love for hours at a time, 2-3 hours. And the one guy finally said, how in the world do you stay focused for 2 to 3 hours? And to me, it'd be like saying, how do I stay focused hanging out with a friend for 2 or 3 hours? Well, I want to be with this friend. I enjoy their company. Well, if I have a lover, wouldn't I want to hang out naked with this person for 2 or 3 hours? Sometimes you're chit-chatting, sometimes you're making love, sometimes you're resting, sometimes you're having crazy monkey sex. Like, who cares? Right? It's just easy. It's literally lovemaking. Well, thank you guys for being here. This has been super fun. And this, again, if you're new, this is based on my book, The Divine Union of the Masculine Feminine. And we have some great live courses coming up in January, where we dive into the masculine feminine union live on Zoom. And you can see all that at my website, katrinaboss.ca. And if you're interested in this tantric intimacy, definitely check out my book, Tantric Intimacy. I love this, and it'll definitely help everybody. Interesting. I had an initial very intense attraction to another person that I experienced the same thing. Oh, interesting. You're so welcome, Andrea. Glad you're here. And then they totally became fearful and ran away as fast and hard as they could. It's a funny dance, right? It's a very interesting dance as to what's felt on either side and what timing is right for everybody. And it's very, very interesting. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. We have 10 more talks planned in December, all about diving deep into this fun place of intimacy and sex and tantra. So thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Helen. So thanks for being here. And we'll see you later. Oh, YouTube sends notifications. Oh, awesome. I'm so glad you guys are here. Thanks, guys.